Hello and welcome to Did Nothing Wrong Live, the show that cuts through the noise and helps you make sense of the chaotic information space around us. I'm Griff Somke. With me are Jay McKenzie and Carl Folk, and we have a very special guest with us tonight, Mr. Jared Yates Sexton. How you doing, Jared?
Long-time listener, first-time caller. Can't wait.
Hey, great to have you. Great to have you around on this one. So, today's episode, we're going to talk about the first few days of the Trump regime. It's been a very eventful time, to put it mildly, and it seems like we're just getting started. We're also going to talk about the utter fecklessness of the Democratic Party in the face of all of this, and how the one person who has decided to step up and lead has been kneecapped at every turn by her own party. And finally, we're going to brainstorm some better messaging ideas and solutions than anything we've been hearing from the establishment. And you know what? Fuck it, we'll do it live. Keep listening to learn more. And remember to smash those like and subscribe buttons like MAGA smashing America's health and research institutions. So, where do you start with a week like this? It's not even over. This is crazy. The MAGA regime has made really good on their promises to tear the institutions apart. And they aren't wasting any time. They've shut down huge chunks of the federal government already. They've sent anybody having anything to do with DEI home on paid leave with the stated intention to lay them off. They have placed a gag order on all departments that roll up under Health and Human Services, which means we're not getting anything from the FDA, that's the Food and Drug Administration, about potential safety issues with, food and drugs. We're not hearing from the NIH, National Institutes of Health. In fact, it looks like they're going to try and disband the entire entity. And that means your state is probably going to lose out on millions, if not billions of dollars worth of federally funded projects and research. I live in a state that's going to lose billions. Most importantly, they aren't going to be able to communicate to the American public and the world anything about, I don't know, maybe an upcoming potential pandemic, maybe a bird flu epidemic that's going around, causing massive spikes in the price of chicken and eggs and recalls of unsafe products, and the list goes on. And this is what departments under Health and Human Services do, and MAGA has decided that none of this is important. We can totally live without this information and ongoing research. And
wait. But it's woke research. It's woke research,
right?
And woke departments.
Woke departments. All these woke departments. We don't really.
Did you hear? They have taken down the pride flags. So America is back, baby.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah.
Mission accomplished. I mean, yeah, this is the aircraft carrier. This is aircraft carrier moment, right? Like we get the banner out. We just trot them.
Yeah, and no more separation of church and state. We're done with that. We're just embracing God and his servant on earth, Donald Trump. That's how we all see it, right?
It's a new order. It's a new day.
Yes.
What kills me about this is, like, we are going to have people die. And I'm not exaggerating or, trying to puff this up. We shut down the research institutions. We shut down things like the FDA, and people are going to die as a result of these decisions. And it's not going to take long. And you can lay this specifically at Donald Trump's door. I mean, the pandemic was one thing. This doesn't have to happen. I mean, we are shooting ourselves in the head here, people. This is not good at all.
No, it's not. And I just want to add, it does a couple of things. One, I'm sure we're all exhausted. First of all, this is a planned, scheduled, orchestrated blitz. Mm-hmm. And it is completely designed to leave all of us exhausted and feeling like everything that we're dealing with is faded. There's no way we could possibly stand in the way. It is a punch in the jaw when the bell rings in the boxing match. But the other problem with it, that everything you just laid out is exactly right. It is a shot in the foot, but it's such a good catharsis for his followers. They are so excited for all of the elite assholes to get theirs. And meanwhile, the entire agenda is just an oligarchical agenda that is going to serve one purpose, which is to funnel all resources, all wealth to the wealth class. But the problem here is it mystifies everything. We're not going to know why people are dying. We're not going to know why we're having these giant storms. We're not going to have the data that tells us things are going wrong. So meanwhile, it's a catharsis for some of the people who aren't going to get any benefits of this agenda, except for they get to live in a world in which they see their political enemies humiliated. And the rest of us, we have to eat meat or eat food and drink milk and wonder if we're contracting some sort of a disease. or, suddenly participating in the brand new pandemic, which we won't even know is happening.
Exactly.
Outside of maybe hearing about it on the BBC or Al Jazeera. And that's
right. And the thing with the research is so much of that research is being done here under the auspices of the National Institute of Health. So we may not hear about it on the BBC or Al Jazeera because so much of the research that was being done here is going to be gone and it's not going to be duplicated anywhere for a while. Even if they spin up over in England or if they spin up over in France, it's going to take them a while to spin up to this level.
No, and that's the whole thing, right? Like this is the brain drain, right? Like ultimately when you take 30 to 50 billion dollars out of every, well, not every, but a lot of colleges and a lot of institutions, you've handicapped. And, between that and the direct effect on researchers, doctors, people who are applying those grants and using them to do this work, like those immediate repercussions at the personal level are huge, but the bigger ones, 6 months from now, 4 months, a month from now, people aren't going to, like, there's no more building new vaccines. There's no more building new cancer treatments. There's no more looking after how we are going to deal with any one of 1,000 problems that we've identified to work on. And like, I mean, this is one that we could literally spend the next 2 hours, all the 4 of us, talking about just this one small area. And I think, for a lot of us, we knew shock and awe was coming. Like Jared said, like this is made to exhaust us all and demoralize us into not fighting anymore. And the reality is, these guys have now thrown everything at the wall. And some of it's to see what sticks, some of it's to terrorize, and some of it's to obfuscate from other things. And like, when we're talking about every one of the 1,500 J6 participants, including high-level plotters, planners, and people who were on the ground executing those plans, people had no conception that, like, when he said every one of them, he wasn't kidding. And like, I think that's the toughest part for myself, but I'm sure for all of us, is like, we've all known that when they said these things, this was exactly what they meant to do. They weren't like lying to us just to fuck with us. They were telling us these are the plans we have, these are the steps we're going to take, and these are the end goals we hope to achieve. And we're 3 days in, 3 complete days in. And between just those 2 things right there, that's a year's worth of news in a normal world. And that is one. I mean, I have a list going right now of all of the things that have so far
turn
transpired.
that page, Carl.
Yep, no, and so like it just keeps going, right? And so, we haven't even gotten to Musk throwing a Nazi salute. We haven't gotten to the part where the like we're removing military photos from the Pentagon,
troops to the border,
and disappearing people. Yeah, we're putting troops at the border. We have let's see, what else do we have here? So end of the CDC, National Institute of Health, FDA. So all the Civil Rights Division has been shuttered, and the cases have been paused or shut down, which effectively means there's no Civil Rights Division, which means there's no enforcement of civil rights. There's
go ahead and discriminate, folks. There's not any consequences for it anymore.
Well, then we're getting to the other part, which is the federal government is essentially being resegregated. And in sum total, what it appears to be, with how they've targeted DEI, massive air quotes, the size of fucking airplanes on that, that they're using this now to tell people to snitch on one another. They're telling people to kind of create their own internal surveillance culture.
Right.
And so, I mean, this just keeps going.
Well,
right?
look,
And like that's the thing. They're trying to overwhelm everyone as well as the system itself, right? Like, so it's not something where you can say, okay, we're going to stop this one thing with this legal action. We're going to stop this thing with a different legal action. At a certain point, you stop some, but you can't stop it all. And that's what they're planning.
Yeah.
Well, the thing with pulling back DEI is they're going all the way back to the Civil Rights Act. And
they took out part of it.
Yes,
1965.
And they're actually saying that I was listening to Charlie Kirk today. God forgive me.
Like you do.
Like you do, as a normal person does.
Jesus Christ, man.
They are calling his executive order rolling back affirmative action at the federal level and essentially doing away with an EO that LBJ put out. They are calling it his greatest accomplishment. This is an amazing thing that Republicans were too afraid to get rid of this because they didn't want to be called racist. Yeah. And they are praising Trump because he is doing away with this. And they're calling, the reason they're getting away with this partly is because, yes, their followers just want to rub our faces in it, but they love the fact that it is being framed as DEI is the racism. DEI is the segregation.
Right. Yeah.
We are stopping the federal government from taking away what white people deserve.
I just want to make 2 points off of that because you just nailed this. First things first, we have to stop saying DEI. Mm-hmm. If you want to talk about messaging, like Rufo and all of the think tanks and the institutes that have created this situation, they've figured out where the points are, right? They've figured out how to message this stuff. I think resegregation is exactly what needs to be said.
Yeah.
It needs to be called, basically, this is the whitening of the United States government.
Yeah.
The second point, absolutely, and for people who don't know this, historically, and this is, but man, it pisses me off to no end that this country doesn't understand the history of actual fascism. Like, we have this sepia tone Saving Private Ryan idea of it. You know, the guy in Germany gave a couple of speeches and man, they were so electric. They couldn't help but do it. What people don't understand is that fascism uses the entry points of liberalism against itself. Absolutely. Every time.
Oh, yeah.
And in this case, not only are they legalizing discrimination, white supremacy, and fascism, but they have figured out the perfect jujitsu move, which is using racism as the entry point, which is reverse racism. And they have figured out a way to do that. And when we say DEI, and I don't know what everybody's background is here. I'm a former recovering academic. I spent 15 years as a professor. When you use those terms, all that regular people hear is corporatese, academic language, and every time you use one of these terms, it resonates and it's like, screw those people, right? It's that sort of like rejection of liberalism and like elitism. And so they have figured it out. They've got this roadmap done, and basically there is no defense against it right now because it is like a fight against elites and people aren't able to message it. So what you just said is exactly right, but I also think that we're fighting on their battleground. Yeah, like we're accepting their rhetoric and we're accepting the way that they push these things.
That's fair.
And just to go back real quick to the Charlie and the Civil Rights Act, 1 year ago yesterday, Carl, you and I did a podcast where we called this specifically Charlie trying to cancel Martin Luther King. And we talked about exactly why he was doing this. And we said, you know, he's going to try and repeal the Civil Rights Act if he ever gets the chance. Here we are. 1 year and 1 day later, and look what he's done. Wow.
Literally, I was looking at that, Griff, and that's the part. Like, that's the thing, right? Like he
wasn't being subtle.
No, these people aren't subtle.
They telegraph everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they've been telling us all exactly what the plan is now for close to a decade out in the open, right? And so, like, it's simultaneously horrifying and infuriating that like we're dealing now with a population that hasn't listened, obviously, like has no capacity to hear things that resonate for a long time. And it's really, I mean, it's quite shocking, you know, like realizing people really didn't understand the way that, you know, I speak about fascism as something that has its own interlocking and kind of interconnected structures that are separated from the rest of our structures. And like for a lot of people, they don't understand that those disparate parts, even if they're not attached like visibly or, you know, kind of even rhetorically, they're all working in concert, right? And so the thing for the right has been changing the cognitive state of the country, and now they can do that at the barrel of the gun or at the boot of state power, and they still haven't fully understood that yet, even though they're doing it, right? Like they're not projecting that thing the way that you would traditionally assume from an authoritarian entity like this. So something I think this thing's more fragile than people understand, but also it's going to do immense damage even if next month it starts to have unintended consequences blow back on it so badly that fragility starts to really show.
I just wanted to say I agree there has to be, we hope, a limit somewhere, but it's not just that people haven't been listening and haven't believed us. It's if you've been saying this for years, and I know Jared has, and I know we have in various ways, but it's not just that people don't believe you. It's that very smart people have told you you're crazy, you're overreacting, you don't understand it. Where is this coming from? And really, all you have to do is listen to them, and it's not a fun, enjoyable activity. I usually have to, put my headphones in and pair that with some exercise to get out a bit of the feelings I have listening to these people. But like they have to telegraph it, in part because the messaging has to be coordinated. They all have to be on the same page. They all have to be going to the same place. But I mean, you're right, Jared. They're telling us. They've been telling us, and now they've realized that this is the moment, and they're seizing it.
Well, and I listen, Carl and I have talked about this in the past. Like, there's a weird misunderstanding of the way that this language and rhetoric and behavior changes culture. And we've watched this country move so far to the right just because not just Donald Trump's out there saying that, but because there's like a complete reactionary movement that is all over the place now, podcast, YouTube, influencers, you name it. But then as things have moved further and further to the right, there has been this sort of liberal capitulation because quite frankly, a lot of the people want this, right? Like there's a reason why they are giving Trump the benefit of the doubt, which is that he quite frankly represents sort of a bulwark against leftists and against a lot of the things we've been talking about for the last few years. And they simply decided we would rather have corporate-led, oligarchical-led authoritarianism than we would want actual social justice or actual change and actual movement, because that would, threaten their wealth and their power and their platforms. Right. And so now we're in this terrible ass situation where, it's becoming clear that they have captured so much. They haven't just captured the political environment. They own every communication platform that can be found. On top of that, this new push to take over TikTok and basically influence the younger generation and turn it into state-run propaganda, it makes my teeth hurt looking at it at this point. And I will just say, for all the people who said that this was crazy for forever, you're wasting time. You're ceding ground at this point. Right. And if this continues, this Overton window is, I mean, it's been scooting. It is going to just sprint at a pace that I don't think most people are prepared for at this point.
Well, and that's what I was going to say as well. Like, the thing is with any of this, right? Like, it's all social reproduction, whether we want it to be or not, whether it's malign or not, whether it's anti-democratic or not. Like, a democratic cognitive culture, right? Like, that really does look at, democracy, kind of reason and these things as these kind of high and lofty ideals. And that's shared, right? Like that's how we think about like cognitive culture and sociology. And like what you have here now is increasingly we're going to have a generation of people who have been raised now in an Overton window that's not just shifted, but like you were saying, has run to the right. And, that fear of social change and of like economic change, and the fear that you might be called racist for saying something stupid or being a racist, right?
Right.
Has really set up a bizarre system, like socially, where now like the cognitive culture is shifting towards some kind of authoritarian cognitive culture, right? And like you have that coupled with a capitalist consumerist view, plus the bizarre infatuation with the wealth we have and Trump. This thing is now a self-sustaining model, right? Like in 2016, this wasn't self-sustaining yet. This was still a movement that hadn't figured or had the inertia to do that. This is something different now, right? Like we're not dealing with some proto-autocratic, proto-fascist movement. Like this is the real deal. And it's going to shift society, right? Like even with us, even if we beat this back and in some way have real elections where these people release their grip on power, whether that's 2 years or 4, we have decades and decades now of like actual thinking, like, and work,
right,
to rebuild something better, right? Like I think, one of my silver linings right now is like people are against this, right? What's happening, like Trump supporters sure are on his side, but overall, like this is not something that a majority of the country is behind. And once you have stuff like what he's doing with Veterans Affairs now, and they're pausing everything there as of this afternoon, like they're setting up something they just don't understand, right?
Yeah.
Like we've talked about it before on this show. I've talked about it with Jared before. Like the secondary and third wave consequences of these actions, they don't have control of this. Like
no,
they
and it
just
seems
don't
increasingly that they don't care, because I don't think there is a long game here.
Well, I was about to yeah, it doesn't seem like there's a long game.
Well, and I just want to say on that, and Carl, what you were just talking about, I just wanted to add to it. A thing that I've been seeing with this, just to lay my personal cards on the table, like I grew up in an incredibly abusive childhood, right? Like I was around a ton of mental illness. Anybody who has been in a household that has mental illness and abusive behavior recognizes everything that's happening right now.
Yeah.
We have an abusive president who abuses anyone who stands up against him. And there's a really strong thing, and Carl, you were touching on this a little bit. America is in decline. That is indisputable. The American empire is in decline. Everything has looked like shit since the turn of the century. We've known that America has lost power. We know that we don't have as much opportunity to get ahead as we used to in the past. Corporations are gobbling up everything. They're rigging the game. The precarity is getting worse and worse. We have had a national depression. We have all felt terrible about the future and the possibility. You know what happens on the other side of that when it swings? You have mania. And if you look at fascism and authoritarianism, it builds off of a manic, like irrational idea of the future. And when I was watching the inauguration, when he said the golden age is here, I was like, there it is, right? All you have to do is enable people and convince people of a fantasy, like make America great again. And the next chapter is the golden age. Now, all of a sudden, it's like everything's fixed, everything's fine. And when you go on that bender, it doesn't matter who gets hurt. It doesn't matter what damage you do. And what you just said, Carl, is really important, because what I've been watching with MAGA, and I've watched all these components coming together, what has been missing is an open, unabashed celebration of violence, whether or not it's domestic or it's militaristic. And when those things slide in, and I could very well see pogroms being carried out against immigrants at this point, particularly now that we just have a bunch of paramilitary assholes who have been loosed out in the world without any consequences. You start seeing that stuff. And by the way, Carl, you brought up like the Veteran Affairs stuff. That stuff, like if it gets out of control, you have no idea where it's going. And so right now we're in what has been planned. right? We have, in the past few days, we have experienced what has been planned and meticulously crafted. It's when this thing reaches terminal velocity and they do not have explicit control over it, this thing is going to get wild very, very.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, that
definitely.
that reminds me, trying to play this out and see where this goes. It reminds me of kind of the build up to what eventually became QAnon, because it started off as a campaign with Pizzagate, and eventually that became Pedogate. But the central premise was the same, that the liberal elites were bathing in blood and eating children, and there was sex trafficking, and all of this was going on, and it was all a conspiracy to bring down Donald Trump. And most of his supporters were on board for that, and they believed it, and they were pushing that messaging until it got too fucking crazy. And eventually, like you can plan certain things, you can have your messaging, you can be convinced that it resonates with certain people and gets campaigns going. But yes, where it goes, no one knows, and who ultimately controls that message, or what it means, or how they act on it. I mean, I think if we look at a real wild card now, it's going to have to be the militias at the border, who have been itching to do something for years and years. Oh, yeah. And the only thing that was really stopping them was consequences. But now with these pardons, they're telling them that either we won't go after you, or if you do get caught, we'll just pardon you. And they believe it, and why wouldn't they?
Well, they've seen an awfully good example of it recently. Yeah. I mean, really, they've got a role model to look at and say, you know what? If you get locked up fighting for Trump, he'll fix it. He promised he'd do it, and he did it. It's over.
And Stuart Rhodes is meeting with lawmakers on Capitol Hill now. It got his full pardon.
I mean, that's just it, right? Like this is the thing, though, right? Like they're building now an explicit paramilitary structure, right? That's like,
which has been radicalized by going to jail, which turns out is how this works.
Yeah. Funny enough, it's not like we have any historical counterparts to this. The thing is, and I think the thing that keeps coming up is like they have no reason to believe now that there will be repercussions, right? And I think, I was talking with a couple of friends, and we were all just kind of talking about this spring and this summer, and like, these are hardened researchers, and they're kind of looking at it the same way, which is like, the Proud Boys are going to be back, right? Like we're going to see them again, like we did in 2019, 2018, 2017. They're going to be emboldened. They are going to be fighters. And this is the SA moment, right? Like where you have a bunch of hardened fighters coming out of both jail and just like the shadows, who have been training now for 4 years in some cases to be ready to basically do street combat. And like,
no, you're absolutely 100% right on that.
It's a different world fundamentally. Like the people who know, we're all kind of saying the same thing, which is all of this, the last 4 days, including the inauguration, like have been different. This isn't the first Trump inauguration or presidency, and it's already, they don't have a grasp on this.
No.
Like as much as they're trying to pretend they do, like they've got a grasp on executive orders, they've got a grasp on their deconstruction. But they don't have a grasp on the consequences of their actions, even if they were to stop today. Like the ripples are just so massive and so incredibly complex now.
Absolutely.
Like, in a society and a world that is this interconnected, like when you're, we're a third of the way down that list that I held up. And like, this week has been, even for myself, like I've been looking at this and just kind of saying, okay, so every one of the worst case scenarios that every expert, every academic, every person who kind of was looking at this is off by at least one magnitude or two.
Yeah.
And so I think, for most people listening to this, it's as bad as you think it is and probably worse than we know it is yet. But that has left, that's going to leave room now. Like, there are going to be forced conversations about what is acceptable. What do we need back? What do we need to do now? And for all of us, I think, we're not going to have political representation. There's no federal government as we understood it a week ago now to do the things that we expect of them. And so we have to start thinking realistically as communities and as individuals within communities, what we're going to be able to do to both survive, but also start to really do the grassroots work of building the counter to this, which is the real argument, which is like, you're about to get robbed in a way no one's ever seen. And it's not because there's some dude next door who moved in from North Africa or from Mexico City. It's because Elon Musk and his fascist pals have decided you're an easy mark.
Right.
And I think, the conversation has to shift.
Well, and this is why it's so important that there is an opposition, that there is a counter, because the right is going to say they're winning every day. Everything that happens, they're going to say they're winning. That was us. We did it. It's good. And if it's bad, it was the other guys and it's their fault. And if you don't have a counter to that, they're just going to win every argument.
Yeah. I will say, I listen to this podcast all the time. I can't imagine most of the listeners need to hear this, but for anybody who doesn't need to hear this, or does need to hear this, there's no special prosecutor who's going to take care of this. The Democratic Party is not going to wake up tomorrow and suddenly grow a spine and stop capitulating. Like, there has to be an actual construction of an opposition to this.
Yes.
Yeah.
And for anybody who is just waiting on Trump to do the wrong thing or cross the wrong line or whatever, that is not how this works in any way, shape, or form.
No.
It doesn't matter how bad the economy gets. It doesn't matter how bad bird flu gets. It doesn't matter if milk is just completely undrinkable and the price of eggs, everybody wants to reply to that, whatever. None of that stuff matters. They have their own propaganda channels. They have their own conspiracy theories that will explain all of this away. If you are going to fight this thing, I welcome to it, because you are in the fight. Period.
Absolutely. And it would, to your point, Jared, it would be really wonderful if we had a functional opposition party right now that was actually standing up and saying some of this stuff and calling it out. Because like you said, Jay, they're going to go out every day and say that they won. They're going to go out and claim victory because that's what they do. And that's what they have been doing even when there is a functional party. They love this because nobody is pushing back on this. And so few of the people in the Democratic Party seem to have any desire to push back. Again, Carl, to your point, it's very clear that they prefer Trump to potentially somebody who's a little younger and a little farther off to the left. And we're seeing that really clearly. The one person who has pushed back consistently on this stuff at a national level is AOC. She has come out and forcefully said this is bullshit. She has stayed away from the inauguration. She's on Instagram, she's on Blue Sky every day talking about how terrible this stuff is. And it seems like her fellow Democrats don't really want her in that role. I mean, she just lost a party leadership on the House Oversight Committee to a guy who's 74 and recovering from esophageal
115
cancer.
years old.
Yeah. I mean, God bless him, thank you for your service, sir. And I hope you beat the hell out of that cancer. Cancer's terrible, but it's time for them to let some of the people who are more vigorous in their opposition to this stuff, maybe because they're, half the age of this guy, if not less, come out and push back on this. And they just don't seem to want to let that happen. They'd rather have Donald Trump.
I just want to say two quick things on this, Griff, because you couldn't have nailed it more to the wall on this. First things first, I am so tired of online leftists being like, oh, AOC is doing this for attention. I don't give a shit. She's saying exactly what needs to be said.
She's meeting the fucking moment is what she's doing.
She's meeting the moment.
Exactly.
And she's being courageous So you could like the online left is so addicted to ironic detachment, so they don't have to actually fight for shit. The second part is, why does the Democratic Party not stand up for this? It's a couple of reasons. One, because they are free market disciples, and what does the market want? It wants authoritarianism, period. The second thing is, if they are going to actually critique what is going on, and there's a reason that they did not utter Elon Musk's name in the 2024 election, as he bought a presidential candidate. And why? Because they helped him get his money. Because the Democratic Party dropped the fucking ball the one time that we could have regulated these assholes and kept them from becoming oligarchs. And so the people who created this situation, who made heart eyes at Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos when they came to Capitol Hill, and were like, I have a tough question. How did you get so great? Right? Like, they have blood on their hands for all of this, and they have no desire whatsoever to actually sit and actually throw critiques, because they have helped create this thing, and they would much rather just go along and see where it's at and think that they're going to win a midterm. And meanwhile, all they're doing is capitulating and making the problem that they started in the first place even worse.
And what is their messaging for a midterm? How are they going to, just based even on what they've said so far, why should you vote for these people? I mean, what's their messaging here?
Gonna bring back the fascism thing. He's a fascist. We're gonna counter that.
I've got a proposal. It's just bring Mark Cuban back out. He's the good billionaire. He'll take care of it.
Yes. Maybe this is the one that's gonna save us. We have to. It has to be a billionaire that's gonna save us, right? It can't be anybody else. It can't be us.
No,
it can't be AOC. I mean, she's saying too many things that are objectionable and make us a little uncomfortable. We wouldn't want to be uncomfortable. Our net worth is still ticking up. We wouldn't want to stop.
Well, and that's just it, right? Like, I've been thinking about this in terms of like comfortability, status quo, whatever we want to call all these things. And like, the Democratic Party fundamentally broke itself, right? Like, they can't stand for anything because their donors can't stand for any one thing, because that might actually stake their profit margin ground. And like, when you have a system that's this far gone, like, the opposition party is a have to have, right? Like, I've been talking about this a little bit more privately with some friends, but like, there are a lot of reasons to have an opposition party, right? Like, one of them is the messaging that has to be done. There are a couple others, one of which is, as Trump and the Republicans move further and further from democratic norms and from the Constitution, both the written document as well as the intent that we tend to follow in this country. Intent is loose, but that we do tend to. You have to have a party that can basically say, look, this is the reality. We still function as a constitutional republic. Whether or not you do is up to you, but because we do, we have the power of the document. You don't. And that ultimately, in the kind of power struggle we are now in and will continue to be in, is going to become increasingly more important, right? And like, the messaging is one part of that, but the reality is you have to lay claim to the rightful heir to the Constitution.
Yeah.
You cannot seed this shit every turn and be posting shitty self-cropped memes on social media while they're literally rounding up American citizens in black bag
retweet for
ice
awareness
raids. Like, the juxtaposition here is getting to the point where the absurdity is falling away, the farce is falling, and just the sheer ineptitude and unwillingness to listen is like, they're going to shift from this being like, why aren't you doing anything, to rage. And at that point, again, like with the Republicans, these are things they can't control. If you have a population that feels like you're not doing shit, there's nothing to lose because the federal government's being gutted like a fish, and you have no one there saying this is how we're going to do it, that's how you get into really hairy social moments that do not have an outcome that's usually good for anyone, right? Like, it's not likely any one side wins, but it's way likely that every side loses ultimately. And we're just, like, we're deep into the weeds, and like, we have to have an opposition.
Yeah, and it's got to come sooner rather than later, because you said this about when is the Overton window going to move too far for any of this to matter. And I don't think, I mean, we talked about this pre-show, how are they going to do this for 4 years? Hell, how are they going to do this for 4 months? This is crazy, and it's going to get crazier. So we need desperately to have that counter messaging coming up from our people, from our side, from people who are not pushing this agenda.
Well, I just want to say, like, the people who choose the messaging, when they're not creating the messaging, they're working for Zuckerberg.
Right, exactly.
Like, those people don't want to say things that are going to keep them from getting their consultant jobs with the oligarchs who have created this situation and are taking, advantage of it. When I am in meetings, also, for the record, every now and then I mistakenly get invited to some meetings, right? And it talks about messaging. And do you know what they talk about the entire time? Analytics. That's all. They talk about, our analytics show us this. It shows us this. Well, first of all, those analytics are controlled by the oligarchs that you're supposed to be defeating in the first place. The second thing, they don't know how to talk to regular human beings. If you turn on something like Pod Save America, like, it's literally like you're listening to the opening credits of The Matrix talk to you. Yeah. It's just binary code. They do not understand, like, what is actually going on with people. And for the record, like, in the lead up to the 2024 election, we saw this. They're like, hey, stupids, the economy is good. Okay. Well, is that your message? That you're wrong and the numbers show something different from your actual experience, so you're not going to talk to them? And meanwhile, it doesn't matter if they win elections or lose elections. They still get paid, and they're still going to go do their summer internships with the Zuckerberg Institute or whatever it is. Like, it's just the back and forth of it. And that's one of the main problems with the party at this point.
Well, I also think, looking at a lot of the messages from Democrats right now, I see a lot of them, even Bernie Sanders, coming out saying that we could work with President Trump if he's willing to help working class people. And there's been this push in the messaging to say that, well, we believe in bipartisanship if it does X, Y, or Z. Like, they have to give him a chance. And I think in the back room, they're probably saying, well, we know he's going to fail, but we have to appear to give him a chance and be willing to work with him. And we can't just be the opposition, because that's not what people want. And I'm sure that's what the analytics are telling them. But I think there is, again, an assumption by Democrats that if it gets bad enough, that everybody will come back to them. And I don't think that's true. I think that there is equally, maybe even a greater chance, that if Democrats do nothing and things get worse and worse and worse, Republicans get more support. Republicans get more votes and more people coming out, because they're the wrong answers, but they have answers. They will tell them things that they want to hear.
They're giving them a future.
Right.
They're giving them a future, right?
If
like,
you're Burger King, you don't wait for McDonald's to suffer from mad cow disease. Like, that's not, that's not how that works. And, like, the entire idea at this point that somehow or another this is just going to exhaust itself. No, more people are going to stop voting. That's the entire point. Like, nobody talks about the 2024 election was actually, like, we keep seeing decreased turnout. Exactly. We keep seeing people dropping out of politics because they don't have anyone representing them at this point.
Yeah.
And as a result, and it was coined under the, the DLC back in the late 1980s, 1990s, where they were like, we're never going to defeat Reagan, so we just have to become more like Reagan. Congratulations. Mission accomplished on that front. And what did they do? They said, well, you have to look at reality. You have to look at the data. That's not how politics works.
Right. Exactly.
You convince people and you inspire people to go out and vote. And the Democratic Party has failed in every regard. And they've become completely conservative at this point. That's
the last time they tried that. The last time they tried that was Obama. And that was maybe the last time they could have actually pivoted. And they didn't. And he didn't. And it was a great message, and it worked, and it's why he won. But he didn't deliver on it. And that's a whole other podcast to say why. Yeah. But that hunger is still there.
Well, they kind of got it with Kamala Harris. They created a simulation of it with Kamala Harris, and we watched it, and we were like, yeah, all the pop and fizzle of, the Obama hope and change was there, but meanwhile, you're just like, Goldman Sachs loves us. It's like, okay, great, that's wonderful. This is a great pivot that we've made here.
Yeah. Let's bring out, Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney and have them endorse our ticket. And, the one thing that just kicked me in the gut that I saw over on Twitter, and I forget which MAGA account said it. It was like, maybe we just got sick of Cheney and Bush and the rest of the neocons faster than you guys did. And that's where I kind of found myself thinking, damn, that hurts, but
that's cold.
That's cold.
Well, that's the thing though, right? Like, I think that's the actual argument in some ways, right? Is like, we have now seen a collapse of both major parties' ideological base, right? So like the neocons and Bush 2 are gone.
Yeah.
They don't exist anymore. That's dead. Neoliberalism and the hope that the pseudo system that it represented, along with the neocons, like that it could limp along and somehow hold out, like that put us in this position, right? Like, going back to what y'all were saying about Obama and hope and change and all this shit, like, if Obama had delivered two things, if he had delivered healthcare and any kind of simple economic reforms that weren't bailing out the banks, even if it caused a little bit more pain in the long term, but helped average citizens, we'd be in a different trajectory, right? Like, a lot of this is coming, both sides right now is coming from the realization that, like, this system failed.
Yeah. And what parts of healthcare he did deliver, people still love. People are very much in favor of that. Every time the Republicans have tried to kill it since Obama got it passed, they haven't been successful because people realize, oh yeah, that's my healthcare. I want to keep that. If they had gone bigger, we're not having this conversation right now. You're right.
No,
we're just not.
Right. And that's the thing, right? Like, this goes to what, like what they should do in the future too. Like, honestly, the neoliberal dream of a post-history world is dead. So let's just set that shit aside, understand that that's failed, and you can't do technocratic bullshit in place of material good. And, like, it's just mind-boggling to me. Never in my life have I seen the Democratic Party actually function as a party and not just as a funding apparatus for its donor class. And this is the logical, end of 37 years of that.
Yeah.
And, when people don't have any other option, when you're stuck with someone who is very clearly a facsimile of a dream, and the other person is a fascist nightmare, and the population doesn't go out to vote, that's not a mandate issue. That's not a right wing. The right wing has gained all this new power that it didn't have in 2016. It's that the Democrats didn't give people a better option. And that's the thing, right? Like, we have a radicalization problem, sure, but we also have a party that's been unable to message its way out of a bag, and a party that has broken its own ability to, like, say the thing. Going back in our conversation even further, like, you can't say shit if your donors are the same people who are working against you ultimately.
Yeah.
And so, at the end of the day, an opposition party has to be free of those limiters. And that means that the Democrats, and whatever the permutation that comes next is, has to understand that, and know that, like, people aren't just going to accept them because things are bad. They have to have change, like material change for them and their families in the positive, and they have to do that. And if they don't, people are going to increasingly tune out, and others are going to increasingly say, shit, these people told a better story and have at least a plan for a future that sounds like I might be able to exist in.
Well, and the Democratic Party defines itself as basically a group of smug losers, which
Yeah.
is we may
Yes.
not win elections, but we're right.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, we can't help it that people are stupid and they don't understand what's good for them, which actually is like sort of the liberal neurosis, right?
Right.
It's the idea of, well, I would do something if I could do something, but I can't. So I'm just going to sleep well based on that fact. And one of the problems here, and listen, I think Donald Trump is one of the most disgusting human beings that has walked the face of the earth. You know what you need to do? You need to learn from his successes. And
Oh,
here
yeah.
are the successes. One, the man is very good at providing emotional catharsis for people. They are frustrated, they are pissed off, and they want somebody to be frustrated and pissed off at. And by the way, there's a lot of like real actual anger that needs to be determined. If you're just going to say, well, it's Donald Trump, we'll get rid of him, everyone knows that's bullshit. Everyone
Right.
knows that things weren't good before him. The whole deep state thing, there is a deep state. It's called the military corporate industrial complex. And if you're not going to talk about it, and you're not going to talk about the fact that neoliberalism redistributed tens of trillions of dollars from middle and working class people to the wealthiest human beings, you are going to lose, because everyone is left around saying, well, what happened? And if every speech that you give and every program you have is means tested, you know who doesn't understand that? Regular people, because they're not
Exactly.
supposed to. The
Yeah.
reason these bills are written the way they are is to keep people from enrolling in these programs and applying for these programs.
Yeah.
It's meant to weed out the people so they won't have to spend as much on them and make them as ambitious as they should be. On top of that, this smug, defeatist idea that you can't help anybody who is repugnant or deplorable. Well, look where we are now. And
Yeah.
just to sit around and say, well, we couldn't have won. I mean, it was a black woman running for office. That is fatalist. Okay,
Yes.
so should we never have a black woman run for office again? Is that what you're saying? America is too racist and sexist to do this? Well,
I mean,
okay, well,
that's
why
what you're
did you
saying.
run it
Fine,
in the
own
first
it.
place?
Fine, own it.
Yeah. If you are going to say that America is a racist, sexist country, which it is, and it cannot be changed or you cannot appeal to them, I have a message for you, which is I'm from Indiana, and the KKK ruled Indiana in the 20th fucking century. And do you know who won the state of Indiana? Barack Hussein Obama II. Okay? So the whole problem here is that they don't want to admit that they have failed. They don't want to lose power. And by the way, that fundraising apparatus that Carl brought up is the component of this. They do not want to risk the guaranteed money that they're getting. They do not want to lose, and this is a generational thing. It's an ideological thing. There's a reason why Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, as ineffective as they are still at the top of the party, and why an AOC is, pushed down and cut off the knees. They do not want to give up power, and they would much rather let the country suffer the consequences of that than to take a chance that could possibly lose and could possibly destabilize their entire base.
Right. Exactly. And it's scary because these people are, in their own way, almost every bit as accelerationist as the people we all think about. They are perfectly prepared to burn it down if they don't get theirs. And they think, well, at least we got ours on the way out. And when you put that together with actual people who are ready to burn the system down, that's a scary combination.
Well, they're burning it down when they won. Like, that's like, they won and they're intentionally lighting this shit on fire and hollowing it out. Like, there's no reasoning with this, right?
No.
Like, this is the personification of unreason, right? And like, when you're dealing with the forces of unreason and fascist reaction, like, that you don't have room to be like, well, we can appease them to the point where they burn things down too much and people get burned. Like, that's the thing. Like, Trump is going to have a touch the stove, right? Like, there's going to be a moment where he grabs onto that fucking coil for dear life. And that's the thing we have to be ready for going forward, is the moment he touches the stove for real in a way that's no longer like, as much as we hate it, obscured by the fact that there's a complicit media system. And when he has that moment, whether it's a Kent State style moment where federal forces shoot someone, or whether it's a moment where his people start killing people, whatever his touch the stove moment's going to be, we can't wait till that point to react.
Yep.
That's not how this works, because to get there is a mountain of bodies. And we as a population can't abide that, right? Like, we're in a world now where, like, we actually have to start thinking about and acting on the fact that these people are going to try and make you complicit. Whether they're Democrats or Republicans, the problem is when you have corruption and an inability to do the things that have to be done as opposition, you become compliant and complicit and part of the machine of that social murder and the industrial death and suffering. And so we all have to get very quickly to the point where we no longer demand things from these people. We demand them from ourselves. Because there's not going to be a moment where the fucking cavalry rides over the grassy hill and we have like a horn section start playing.
Yeah.
And, we're not getting that. The reality is history doesn't look like the thing that we consume as history. History looks like people acting because it's the right thing to do, or because it's the thing you do because it's the thing you do.
Right.
It's not, and it's moments too, like, where we as a population haven't just said enough, but we figure out that all of us as the country, like as the population, are the country, not the people we've deified. And those two things, we have real avenues to present real major pushback here. And
the energy's there. Yeah.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
There's energy. I mean, the electricity in the air right now isn't 2020, but we're quickly approaching that, and it's been 3 days. And that's the thing. Like, do you want controllable, or do you want something that is not? Do you want something that has a goal, or do you want something that does not? Do you want something that has the ability to give the authoritarian in charge pretext, or do you want it to be seen as a peaceful act? Like, there are a whole bunch of things here that you get into the minute you start actually walking this down.
And I think Democrats have to get it out of their heads that they can play it safe. And we'll just get them in the midterms. We'll get them in the next election. The assumption that is going to be there, that it's going to happen, is wrong. And I think there will probably be those elections, but there are still elections in Hungary. There are still elections in Russia. That doesn't mean they're free. That doesn't mean they're fair. That doesn't mean anyone else has any sort of chance of winning. I mean, they're going to break apart all of those foundations. And I mean, the attacks on the courts will continue. And we don't know where they're going. We don't know what they'll get or what they'll actually be able to achieve, but they will go after everything. And if they see an opening, if they see a weakness, they will attack it. And assuming that all the foundations and the structures are just going to be there, and it's all right, guys, just rub some dirt on it and we'll get them next time. It's not going to happen. That's not the way it's going to be. It's going to only get worse and less free and less fair from here on out. So the time to act is not 6 months or 18 months. It's now.
Yeah, and Jay, just to touch on what you're saying, one of the biggest problems within the Democratic and liberal sort of coalition is that they fail to understand that what's happening right now is just a precursor to where we will be in 26. Like, the institutes and the think tanks that created what we're dealing with right now and laid the foundation for us to get here have all of the money in the fucking world. Mm-hmm. And what do? As we're sitting here talking, they're burning the midnight oil at the Claremont Institute. They're burning the midnight oil at the Heritage Foundation. And what are they doing? They're coming up with one lawsuit after another to get to the Supreme Court that they stole. They're coming up with more and more DEI, CRT, all these divisive, sensationalized, emotionally activating things that our media will just continue to trip over their dicks trying to cover and never ever stop talking about. And what is happening on the other side? The Democrats are just saying, just wait. It'll be okay. We'll figure it out. There is no plan. There's no structure. Nope. And for me, like, I have watched this take place every year now. Like, the 2024 election, how do you defeat something like this? You have a party message. The Democratic Party did not talk to each other in any way, shape, or form about a party-wide message. They were all out there alone against a united front. We can't predict what they're going to come up with, and you can't just react to it. You have to create the conditions that are conducive for your political project. And that is exactly what the Republican Party and the right, and now the oligarchs, they're all on the same page doing this. But there are going to be, I know I have a penchant for being very pessimistic on this, but what Carl just said is correct, which is these people, they're fucks. And they are really, really dysfunctional people. What did we see already? We already saw Doge fall apart because Vivek Ramaswamy couldn't get along with Elon Musk, right?
Yeah.
Elon Musk, and listen, I'm not going to tell you what he was on at the inauguration, but whatever it was wild. The man went out and did a literal Nazi salute in front of people. There are moments where the mask falls. There are moments where the disorganization reveals itself.
Yeah.
And if you just have that moment and you're like, oh my God, did you see what they did? Instead of jumping on it and then just being like, wow, I can't believe it happened. You have become a reactive party, which is what the Democratic Party is now. And nobody trusts that. Especially in a time of crisis. You can't be winging this shit. You have to create something that inspires confidence, that actually communicates something and moves people in a direction, and they just don't have it.
Right. And they better find it. And they better find it fast, because we don't have a whole lot more time going forward. We're going to have to figure out something, because that touch the stove moment, as you said, Carl, it's coming. It's really coming.
Yeah.
And
it could be this week. It could
literally. I was, I
can wake up
and check their phone. It might have happened 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, no shit.
Yeah.
Well, I'm literally scanning the socials right now, and it is good to see there's some Democrats speaking back. Velasquez is raining hellfire right now, which is good to see, and with the entire, not the entirety, but I see Ted Lieu behind her and some others. So they're starting, yeah. So she's speaking back, but then 10 minutes ago, quote, oh, Jesus, here we go. Quote, Canada, we have a tremendous deficit with Canada. We're not going to have that anymore. As you probably know, I say you can always become a state. If you're a state, we won't have a deficit. We won't have to tariff you.
I know a bunch of Canadians. I'm related to some. Would you like to know what they all think of that?
Yeah, exactly. The thing is, people are starting to maybe day 3, day 4 after the inauguration, might be starting to piece together the thing that some of us, everyone on this podcast right now, have been screaming for years, which is exactly what we're getting at. So it's interesting to see there are these little perks of moments where they, there are things like going after Canada is low hanging fruit. Come on. Take that one and run with it.
It's trolling.
Forever.
It's just trolling.
Yeah. Well, I think he's actually serious. I think he's serious about that in Greenland and Panama. I think they want their little territorial spats. They want their colonial wars, and they want their we are America's destiny, right?
Right.
They're talking about manifest destiny open. This is a whole different thing than a lot of people realize. They weren't kidding about any of this.
Well, I think what they really hope happens with some of those, with Panama, Greenland, and Canada, is that our version of little green men show up.
Yes.
Yep.
And there's that deniability that it wasn't really us, but if some patriotic Americans decided on their own to listen, they take the call and they take up arms and they plant the flag. Well, how can we not defend those people? But are we not Americans? Do we not love our country and our flag? And we're just defending American citizens on what they call American soil. How can we say no?
That's the risk, right?
That's the playbook. Yeah.
That's the thing, right? That's how America operated until we started actually writing the laws, right? So this would be a return to norms for the U.S. It's just norms that we haven't seen in 120-ish years.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we've done this on so many occasions across the world. I mean,
Oh
ask the
yeah.
Hawaiians.
Well, and by the way, what's happening here is just the mirror image of what we've done elsewhere.
Yes.
I always
Yep.
invite people, which is if you woke up and you read in the New York Times about a quote unquote second or third world country that was taken over by a ridiculous man making ridiculous promises, and he had all the support of the wealthy people in the country, number one, you better believe the CIA had involvement in it. And
Yes.
number two, you would know very clearly that the government had been captured in order to lessen the standard of living, steal resources, and funnel money and power to the wealthy of the country. It's
Right.
happened to us. It's this dumbass American exceptionalism mythology that not only Donald Trump and the Republican Party, but the Democratic Party and our media and a large part of our cultural sort of leaders have gone ahead and sort of filled us with this fairy tale that it couldn't possibly happen here. And we know it's happening here. And Jay, what you brought up with the little green men, like everything right now is from the authoritarian playbook.
Yes. Yep,
like nothing
exactly.
that we're talking about is new. All of this, and by the way, it stretches throughout time. These narratives and these stories and rhetorical things and legal strategies have been done over and over again. It's just the fact that most people don't know about them. And as a result, they're
Right.
just sort of they don't see it. They're not able to accept it. And by the way, we don't even have a party and or a media system that's willing to talk about it. And so instead, it's left for people who actually know about it to talk about it, and then like small select groups to understand it.
Exactly. Well, folks, that's our show for the week. Thank you for tuning in, Jared. Thank you for coming on. Appreciate talking to you. This has been great. Big fan of your stuff for a long time, so it's great we finally got you around. Thank you for tuning in, and like and subscribe on your content platform of choice. We will see you next week. And remember, everyone mentioned did nothing wrong.